Would you know it, before I could get to my hotel, I found myself caught right smack in the middle of a storm. That's where these disciples are this morning. They are caught in the middle of the storm. In fact, they're in a boat, and the boat that they're in gets caught in the storm. If you know anything at all about the Sea of Galilee and those fishermen, they had gotten in this boat. It's not a real large boat. The boat was about 26.5 feet long. It was 7.5 feet wide. It was only 4.5 feet tall, probably about the size of a third of this stage. It was just large enough for the 13 of them, Jesus and his 12 disciples. You must understand that it had been a rather busy day. Jesus has been involved and engaged in the work of ministry, and while he was involved and engaged in the work of ministry, he had completed his task for the day. He had finished his agenda. So they were getting ready to head over to the other side, and they got in this wooden boat. As they got in this wooden boat, they were tired, naturally so, because they had been involved and engaged in ministry. Peter must have been the one who got to the front of the boat to kind of get things started and get them rolling. Maybe James and John were somewhere nearby, because all of them were experienced fishermen. Maybe Matthew was somewhere middle of the boat or toward the back. He didn't know about much of anything except for collecting taxes. Judas was probably somewhere in the middle of the back, but they all had their responsibility in helping to get this boat to the other side. Jesus, who had really been doing all of the work that day, climbed toward the back of the boat, got him a pillow, and fell fast asleep. It had taken a lot out of him that day while he was working in ministry. I mean, like any of us who have worked all day or who've been busy all day, when the evening comes, we get tired. Jesus is now in the back of the boat. He is asleep in the boat, and they set sail. When they started out, remind you, it was evening time, and while it was evening time, the sun was still shining. In fact, the sky was still clear. The waters that they were on were smooth like silk, and this boat took off. They were setting sail for the other side. In fact, it really looked like things were going okay. It looked like it was going to be a real good journey. It really looked like it was smooth sailing. And as they were moving toward the other side, and perhaps the other side of the shore, somewhere in their purview, would you know it, the rain started to fall. It didn't fall heavy at first, but 1 or 2 drops at the time. But then all of a sudden, there was a gush of wind. The thunder began to roll, and across the sky in a zigzag formation, the lightning began to flash. Here these disciples are finding themselves caught. And I want to suggest this morning that they are not just in the storm, but really I want to suggest this morning that they are caught in the middle. They have not yet reached their destination. They've left shore, but they've not arrived to where they're going. The storm, for some reason or another, has come up, and by virtue of the fact that they're in the storm, they are right smack here in the middle. In the middle, somewhere between beginning and finishing. In the middle, somewhere between where they started out and where they wanted to go. In the middle, somewhere between the beginning of their journey and the end of their journey. They are right smack in the middle. They have not yet completed what they started. They are in the middle, somewhere between success and failure. Somewhere between tragedy and triumph. Here they are right smack in the middle. They have not yet attained everything they wanted to attain. They have at least started out. One of the things we can at least say about them is they've started. But while they have started, they have been unable to complete what they started, because they have found themselves right here in the midst of the storm. They started out going to one place, but before they could get to that place, something comes up and prevents them from getting to where they are headed. And naturally, like any of us, these disciples were frightened. They were fearful. You must see them out there on that particular day. On that particular day, this storm wasn't just any kind of storm. The rain that was falling was not the kind of rain that I was walking through when I was on my way back to the hotel. What you have to understand, the winds must have been somewhat like the winds of Hurricane Arthur that was coming up the East Coast just a few days ago. And the winds had taken that small boat and began to toss it around like some toy. They must have felt like being afraid. They were in that boat. That boat was rocking to and fro, up and down, being twisted and turned like a ride in an amusement park. And here they are out there, and it looks as though their future is over. They felt like they were not going to make it. In fact, they felt like they were going down. They felt like it was over for them. They were caught right smack in the middle of the storm. And might I add this morning, the only thing they were really doing was just following Jesus. They'd been hanging out with him. They were with him all day long. And as Jesus got in that boat to go to the other side, the only thing they were doing is getting in the boat with Jesus. And as a result of getting in the boat with Jesus, they find themselves right smack in the middle of a storm. Fearful and afraid of what would happen. They are now in a place where they need deliverance. And I'm sure that as experienced fishermen, they did everything they knew to do in order to bring that boat under control. If they had too much weight on it, they threw it over. If they were trying to maneuver the boat with their paddles, they did everything they knew. And having done everything they knew to do, there was nothing they could do. In fact, it looked to them that death was imminent, that this would be the end, that out of everything they tried to do, there was nothing more they could do. And can I preach in here this morning and tell you that in your life and in my life, there are those moments and times when we too find ourselves right smack in the middle. That there are those times when following Jesus, when trying to be the person we ought to be and do the right thing, and there are those moments and times when you and I will find ourselves not just in a storm, but there are those times when you and I will find ourselves right smack in the middle. We start on our way to something. We set out with goals, dreams, and aspiration. There are those places we want to go. There are plans that we make. We start out having done everything we were supposed to do, but every now and then, if I had a witness, sometimes before you can get between from where you started to where you're going, something comes up and presents a problem. I'm preaching to somebody right now. Somebody who understands and who knows what I'm talking about, because you're dealing with perhaps a kind of confusion, mesmerized, wanting to know how in the world could this happen. I had everything laid out, everything was planned out, everything was supposed to turn out a certain way, but here I am stuck somewhere between where I wanted to go and where I am. Here I am stuck somewhere between what I dream and what I envision and what has really become reality. I'm stuck somewhere right here in the middle of a storm. I wish I could preach in here and tell somebody I really understand and know what it feels like to start out someplace, and before you can get to where you're going, something comes up and knocks you off your spiritual equilibrium, and you're trying to figure out, how in the world can I get from where I am to where I want? How in the world could this be? I remember as a pastor, here we are sitting in this building this morning, but can I remind you that I remember it was a stormy day. It was a stormy day after we had set out for this building to be built. You all had given the kind of money that was needed. The bank had approved the loan that we needed. The city had given all of the permits that we needed. We saw trucks rolling in with all of the material, and we saw those who were the subcontractors coming in and build. And somewhere before we got to the day we could come in this building, we came into a storm. We had subcontractors walking off the property, liens on the building, and the contractor had run out of money. Here we were. I mean, the walls were up, they were painted, everything was almost there, but before we could open the door and come in, a storm had come up. Look at somebody, tell them, I know something about a storm. And it may not be that you've been involved in some building contract, but I believe I'm preaching to somebody this morning. You started out in a marriage, and you had visions for what this marriage was going to be. When you walked down the aisle, you weren't just walking down the aisle, but as you were walking down the aisle, there was visions on your face and in your mind about what your future was going to be like. But before you could get to the end of the journey, who am I preaching to this morning? Maybe you had some dreams, some aspiration for your child. Maybe it was a business that you were involved or engaged in. Maybe it was some other enterprise that you took off in. But before you could get to where you were going, a storm came out of nowhere.